All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. Very excited to have you here with us. So my name is Tina Tran. I manage our enterprise developer partnerships here at Oculus. We're very excited about a trend that we've been seeing recently, which is large companies accelerating their adoption of VR for training, learning and development, and collaboration. And they're using it for everything from upskilling to reskilling employees, to connecting employees that are in different locations to one another and having them collaborate more effectively, to building empathy across employees and customers alike. Today, we're really lucky to have 4 panelists who have experience in making sure that as companies think about adopting VR, they're helping companies identify ways to make sure that it's possible to have the buy-in that you need at the highest levels and across the organization for large companies to adopt enterprise VR. So with that, please join me in welcoming our panelists today. We have Rich Wang. He is Head of Customer Success at Striver. Next to him is Dan Eckert. He is Managing Director of Emerging Technologies at PwC. And we have John Carlos Lozano from SweetRush, who is Chief Creative Officer. And we finally, at the very end, have a customer who will give us her perspective. And that Blair Bojwani from Hilton Hotels is Senior Director of Innovative Learning. So with that, we'll move to the first question, which is really talking about what the biggest challenges are for gaining traction with customers who want to adopt VR training. I'll want, maybe Rich, you can start with this, since I know that you all are very famous for having Walmart adopt, the biggest of customers. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the challenges that you see and how Striver has addressed some of those challenges.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having us. Again, Striver provides immersive learning for the Fortune 500. Walmart's one of our biggest successes, also lessons learned in terms of how we've deployed. In terms of one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, I think as a whole, enterprise VR is a step level of complexity challenge to adopting VR maybe in the consumer side. There are a lot of enterprise workflows and processes and people that need to be bought in order to make a large-scale deployment successful for something like immersive learning. And so for us, one of the big specific areas that have been challenging is identifying the right personas and teams that need to be bought in from the get-go. We see traction often starting from the learning and development teams, but often if the business side, the operations teams, the folks that are running the day-to-day of the trainees that are meant to go through the headsets, if they're not bought in, it is challenging to get that change management going, to get those habits built. And finally, I think one of the other biggest challenges that we find at the end of the day is it's just often easier to do nothing. It's easier for companies to run a pilot and check the box and say that they've been innovative and not really put in the effort to really roll it out. And so we require a lot of strong champions that have a lot of gumption and vision to really make this successful.
So you touched on change management, which makes me look at Dan and think about in terms of, these are one of the biggest challenges in terms of getting people to adopt, is having them not just look at the content, but how is it going to impact the organization and how the processes work, right? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the work that PwC does on that side of change management and getting adoption.
So let me add one thing to something that Rich said, and I'll share this with you. This is about show, not tell. Don't show up with a PowerPoint and say, hey, look how cool this is, and I can either save you money or make your users better or smarter or something. That's not going to work. Put a headset on their head. Show them what you can do, and the rest is easy. That's the most critical thing, is you have to show them. We were very fortunate. I was in Dallas. We were opening up one of our experience centers. We had the chairman of the US firm in the house. And I literally grabbed him and said, I need you for 3 minutes and I want to show you something. And he's like, whatever. And he put this on, and it was a simulation where you're going through soft skill simulation or soft skill training. And he put this on, and about 90 seconds later, he took the headset off. And after my life flashed in front of my eyes, thinking that was the end of my career, he said to me, this is the future of learning. This is the future of training. And he put the headset back on, and then he finished the simulation, which he failed, which was interesting. But he was all in. And then it was just getting the check marks in place to make that happen. And the change management has to occur at the bottom So grassroots, getting the people excited about it, telling the leaders that they need it, and then at the top, getting those people engaged and bought in to put pressure on the barrier, which is the people in the middle. Those are your blockers. So when you talk about change management, start at the ground level, but also come in from the top. You got to do both. And that's the way that you'll build the momentum to help you get that initial pilot or that initial money or that initial launch that you want to be able to deploy.
I could piggyback off of that. I think, for me, I tend to carry a VR headset wherever I go. On the plane, it's very strange. And so this is how I met Blair. It was just...
I thought it was a purse.
It was. It was a man purse. It's an Oculus man purse, patent pending. I just have one with me almost every single time. So when I come to my customer's office, because we're content developers, I just bring out the headset and I say, try this. And 9 times out of 10, they call back. They're like, please come out, tell us more. And then a lot of it's just really taking them through what can actually be done in VR and AR for learning, because they have no idea. The way they want to apply it is just kind of almost like doing e-learning in the VR headset. And we got to think bigger. So I think part of it is exactly what you said. It's just really getting them exposed to it, because as soon as they get exposed, they're just bought in immediately.
Yeah, picture's worth 1,000 words, totally. Right? 1 minute of VR is worth 1,000 pictures.
And I'll add to that from a client perspective. We knew we wanted to tackle emerging technology, but we didn't really know what VR was or AR was. I never used the word tethered before, or 3 degrees of freedom, and had this thing in my head. And so for us, in the beginning, it was important that we got educated as a learning team to really understand what is this technology, what are the best use cases, where should we really invest our money, and of course find a trusted and valued partner. But that education was really critical, even beyond the learning team, whether it was our senior leaders and then ultimately the team members that we rolled out the VR to understand the use case and how and why we're using this technology.
So it sounds like quite a broad number of things that people really need to pay attention to. It's making sure that you have buy-in at every level of the organization that's going to be touching it. It's making sure that people know what VR is compared to what other trainings are. And it's superpower versus something else, right? There's certain things that you should do in VR. Maybe there are other things that don't make sense to do in VR, and to really talk about that. So that's super helpful. I'd love to hear, I know that you all have been in the L&D space for a very long time, SweetRush.
True, very true.
And so given that that's your bread and butter is really educating,
yes.
How have you gone about educating your customers on what VR is, and how does that play into making sure that you're getting the buy-in that you need from all the different levels? Maybe you can talk a little bit to that.
Well, I think because we've been in learning and development so long, we have so many relationships. So it's easy for me to come to a meeting with Blair and break out a headset, and there would be trust there, and they can see how it's going to accentuate the learning. Because it's key working with partners like yourself that are not just checking the box, or wanting to do something cool, but wanting to use something that actually is effective and actually accomplishes their learning needs. So I think, for us, it's another tool in our quiver, another arrow in our quiver. It's whether it's this or mobile learning or gamification. I've been chomping at the bit for using VR in training for 5-6 years. And the first time we tried to deploy it was a hot mess. And, and then we learned from that, though. It was like, okay, now we know we need to be there helping someone instead of sending someone a cardboard and hoping they figure it out, to actually spending time doing workshops. And I think, VR isn't just like a magic bullet. We do a design thinking workshop with all our deployments of all our learning engagements. And it's really thinking about what your learning objectives are and matching them to those activities within virtual reality. That's what makes it strong. It's not just about making a game or making some sort of experience, because it's so easy to put someone in a headset and they're just so blown away in awe for the first 10 minutes. I love seeing this. It's like seeing someone eat ice cream for the first time, it's like, but then once you get past that, it's like, what is there left to sustain it,
right.
So.
And I think to add to that too, I think it's a blessing and a curse, the the immersiveness and the creativity of the medium. And I think, we have companies and customers coming up to us with what they see on TechCrunch or the latest Wire and saying, hey, can we do this? Can we make it a video game? Can we interact with this element or that? And oftentimes it does come back to use case selection of really, for the enterprise, for this to have value, what is the specific goal you're trying to solve? What is the objective you're trying to hit? And I think it's not, VR and picking content, especially in the L&D space, is not so simple as picking off the shelf, downloading an app and deploying it. There's often multiple sessions of consultative thinking, discussion, education, and awareness. And oftentimes the group that you start out with on that initial phone call is not at all the group that ends up being the people that you need to help make that use case successful. So that's what we find.
So I'm hearing you talk about a very consultative approach, right? Where you're really understanding what the learning and development objectives are, and you're speaking to that and doing a workshop. It's a process, it's a long process of gaining trust to get that buy-in.
100%.
Yeah,
Okay.
unless your friends are ready.
Unless your friends are ready,
Yeah,
I love
that's
it,
true.
nice. So the second question I have for you are what are the critical attributes that VR companies must display to gain the trust and confidence of companies that maybe you haven't had years and years of experience with, but maybe you're just meeting for the first time and getting to know. So that's open to, yeah.
Let me jump into that one. So how many people here in the room are from large corporations, right? We're really complicated. PwC is 260,000 people globally, 60,000 people here in the United States, and everybody knows the answer, right? So it's really hard to do this in the enterprise. And if you think about content and all those other things, when you go in and you make the pitch, you have to lead with the business. What value are you getting? What am I reducing costs? Am I improving the efficacy? Am I checking a box? Whatever the reason that they're looking to get, you have to make it real for them. But the key thing that I think that we miss sometimes is you have to put it in context to credential yourself in their organization. Understand, oh, by the way, it's not just content and it's not just a headset. I got security, I got to integrate into their LMS platform. I got health concerns and sanitation challenges I got to deal with because I'm not going to give everybody a headset. They're going to share it with all their other coworkers. So how do I deal with those issues? How do I deal with a person who's 60 years old versus someone who's 22 years old? You have all of that in a big enterprise, and you have to be able to speak in those terms. You can't just come in and say, I got this really great, awesome, job skill simulation program that's going to change your company. And they're going to like, that's great, but I got to deploy it in my company, and you have to tell me how I'm going to do that. What are the problems that I'm going to face? So you have to make it real for them and answer questions that they may not even realize that they have, or things that they've been noodling on, and they go like, I was just, when I was talking to Blair, we were talking about the sanitation issue. How do I clean headsets effectively without making them smell like a chemical plant, right? And it's like, well, let me tell you about this great product I found, right? And it's like, boom, nice, simple solution, and it just made everything easier. So be prepared to think about those things. It's not just about the content. Those are important things. The headset, important thing. Those are important, but in reality, it's only about 25% of the problem. Right? You've got all this other stuff you have to think about. And one of the big things that we learned at PwC, when we've created this study where we took one course that we taught in the classroom, we took an e-learn of it, and then we created a virtual learning of it, and we compared the efficacy of the modalities, right? Which one was better, which one you retain more information, and we're just finishing up that. And something that we could have done better that we didn't do was we didn't communicate to people outside of this what we were doing. And it created a lot of blockage, right? So little things that you just never think of will come and get in your way. And you have to always be thinking about, how do I adjust? And I guarantee you're going to miss something. There's no perfect pilot or perfect deployment. You will miss something. The difference of you being successful is how do you adjust to it?
I can share some things that we look for when we work with our learning partners, particularly in the VR space. There certainly are some foundational aspects we need to have. competence in learning, understanding learning objectives and measurement strategy. But beyond that, in the VR space, looking for companies that are willing to take risks and willing to really be innovative and not just do and replicate what has always been done. And I'm the type of client or person that really wants to ideate with the company. I want to get down and dirty with them and really figure this challenge out. And I think VR can really be complex. I reflect on some of the scenarios and work we've done with our VR experiences, and what we started with really wasn't what we ended up with, and a good partner will be rigorous with you to really solve that challenge and be ready to deploy and create it when it's ready and when it's right. We probably had 10 different ideas going into a solution, but it took a lot of time, effort, and rigor to really get there. But once you're there and you have the right partner, it's truly exciting and magical to create, but it's important to have that relationship and certainly that trust and confidence in whoever you're working for. We know there's an investment we're going to make. We want to make sure we have the right use case and make sure that vendor support is there throughout the engagement.
Yeah, we never approach our initiatives with a turnkey solution. It's always, how is this going to be customized for you? Because we do custom content. So we approach whatever tool we're using in the same way. And I think approaching clients like yourself with that same mindset just opens doors to like, hey, you're not giving us something that's off the shelf that everyone else is doing. How is this unique for us? How are you treating our content? How are you delivering it? So I think it's really important to not go into it thinking, oh, it's a turnkey solution, but how am I going to make this different with the tools I have? So I mean, just going to the keynote this morning, I was just like, oh my God, they've just opened doors for us because now we don't have to worry about deployment and all these other pieces and hardware. And it's just like, now we can focus on the content and leave that other stuff up to you and do what we do best. So thank you.
Thank you for the plug.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm very excited about it.
I think also to add to that, I mean, it's a very interesting balance to play with how enterprises perceive you as a partner, as a vendor. Sometimes they forget that you're not as big as they are, and they forget that this technology isn't unproven or untested, especially at that specific customer with their culture, with their workflows, with their physical footprint, all of that. And so to play the balance between, hey, we've done this before, we have experience, we understand how to work with an enterprise, but at the same time, hey, we're learning together, we're setting expectations, we're partners in this. When we do come across a surprise, and there will be, how do we respond as a partner and as a trusted vendor? And I think that's much of the mindset both you need to adopt, but also convey effectively with your customers and make them partners. And so it's more that you are experiencing the journey together as opposed to them folding their arms behind a desk expecting the next status update to be perfect.
We call it, at PwC, we call it co-creation. Mm-hmm. So we co-create with our client, and it could be an internal client or it could be one of our clients externally. And going in it with that mindset, letting them know that they're part of it, that gets you also the buy-in. Their skin's in the game. It's their ideas that you're producing. And when they see it come to life in an immersive experience, it's magical. It really is, just like what you said. It's like my idea, I can visualize it, and I came up with that idea. And your vendor is, or your partner in that situation, is really the facilitator to make it happen. But on the other hand, you also have to prevent them from going down rat holes and making bad decisions because they're still stuck in that linear thought on how to do training. And in immersive VR, you have this ability to be incredibly dynamic, especially if you're using artificial intelligence on the back end to make dynamic interactions. It's not scripted. So you have to also be a little harder with them and a little strong arm them once in a while when they're going down the wrong path. But in general, you have to make it a co-creation. They have to be a part of it because they're the ones that are going to know their organization much better than you will. So.
But it's hard because when you film VR, like you can't really see it automatically so fast and you have to wait patiently. And sometimes I would say projects take longer than expected. But again, in working with the right vendor, they'll help you through that. But it's a struggle when there's not that immediacy factor to see what it looks like then and there. And that's something I think you have to work to educate the client on and really, again, understand that background of how the whole VR process works, from filming to stitching, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it was one of the first things I said to her. I was like, this isn't going to go perfect. And then you were kind of, and it was that statement alone saved us from so much headache. Because, I mean, we had a pilot where something didn't work. Remember that? It didn't work.
Oh yeah, one of the
And she's
sessions.
like, no problem, just skip over. They won't even know the difference. And I was like, oh my God.
Right, the front desk scenario.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds like setting expectations is really, really
Oh,
important.
most definitely, yeah.
But it's also a key way to gain trust, right? Because if you let people know what to expect ahead of time and you let them know that it's not going to
Prepare
be
'em, yeah.
perfect, then they kind of are like, okay, you're not trying to sell me this dream. You're being real with me.
Totally.
And that just kind of builds the trust from there. So moving on, the topic of our talk today is how to get from demo to pilot to deployment. My next question to you is, what thoughts do you have in terms of setting up pilots in a way that will lead folks to the better chance of getting a larger deployment? Are there any strategies or tactics that you employ as you set up a pilot so that you can show metrics, you can show ROI, and you can get buy-in to get folks to say yes to the bigger deployment?
Yeah, for us, one thing we found incredibly successful is think for the long term, right? So obviously there's a lot of excitement around VR. A lot of companies and enterprises have innovation teams that are evaluating new tools and technology, but they're often operating on a very short time frame. They're looking at an annual, quarterly type, deliverable. And so it can be easy to get sucked into that and only think, okay, well, let's plan for what we need to get out there. Let's plan the content. Let's get it on the headset. Let's get the headset out there. And it can be tempting to get into a spot where you end up at the end of that pilot and you have nowhere to go. There's no discussion, no groundwork laid with the right teams to make it go far and wide. And so for us, we find is thinking both from a content use case standpoint for the long term, what type of thing are we building today is not just going to apply for this pilot, but maybe apply nationwide or apply in the long run, or how can we generalize this training so that it doesn't just apply to this specific type of employee, but can be used across this enterprise. And then I think from an operational standpoint too, going into that pilot with that long term in mind, thinking, what is this playbook that we're writing that can really be repeatable, operationalized, scalable, that then, once this pilot says, hey, this worked, employees did love VR because it is that much more of an amazing medium, it's more of a simple kind of paperwork type exercise to then roll it out.
I'll speak. Oh, go.
I was just going to.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
You go.
No, I was just thinking about, have you ever gone to a tasting where you've gotten so much food that you're full? Right? So I always think of kind of our deployments like that too as well. It's like you got to know how much to give to kind of get someone to come back for more. And so it depends on the client. I mean, we've had clients where they're like, oh, no VR. And I'm like, show me your training. And it's on PowerPoint with circles. And I'm like, God, please let me make some for you. And we just do a little demo and it's just like there, And I think from there, it's just figuring out how much more do you give before they sign off on the whole thing. Right. So we've done a lot of kind of going back and thinking about, going to therapy and thinking about, did we give too much in this situation or did we give right enough? A lot of times we think, oh, we could accomplish that just with a small piece and really just focused on that. And I think that's one of the biggest learning things for us is like, I think as just developers or creative folks, we want to think about the whole thing. We want everything to be perfect. When we realize it needs to be that perfect small piece. It's just like, in art school and they say, your portfolio should have only 2 pieces in it if they're the best pieces you've done, not 7. So I think for us, pilots are really kind of figuring out what's that thing that will sing to get everyone bought in. So,
yeah, for us to move from demo to pilot to deployment, again, first it's all about that right use case and, think small, have a small success and get the organization excited and build that buzz for VR. And the way our approach was, we did a pilot where we invited a couple hundred team members at our corporate office to try our first experience, which was all around hotel immersion, where corporate team members who never had experience at a hotel were now able to understand the hotel operation and try out some physical operational tasks. And so we did this pilot, and then we looked and said, okay, well, how do we launch this? Because our deployment vision was 6 offices around the world. And every year we have a leadership team meeting where we invite 300 of our VPs and above, our top leadership, to our corporate office area outside of Washington, D.C., and we staged the VR there. We had 5 different setups. They all got to try it. Then they go back to their offices and talk about it. So we generated a lot of interest. And so by the time we launched, we had people, coming to the learning team to say, hey, how can we be a part of this? And we want to see this and experience it. And it's really important that people, I think you kind of prepare them for what's coming, you share in the excitement and really build it up at first once you're ready to deploy. And so that was how, we were able to have some of that success around the world with the rifts and everything and getting people confident with the equipment, etc. But it was a process. That was probably from pilot was in February to that launch at the meeting was June, and then formal deployment was September for a bit of a timeline.
So I would echo John's remarks here and just add one thing to it. Create something small, bite-sized. Make sure it's highlighting something that you can do that you can't do in any other modality in an economical way. For us at PwC is multi-language. At our firm, we probably speak 60 languages. And all the training is in English, but we're getting demands for our trainings to be in multi-languages. So we create a very small interaction. We do soft skill training, not job skill simulation, but soft skill training. We also don't use controllers. We use everything through gaze and voice. So we let the individual speak, and then the avatar responds. And we can now give them a choice. Would you like this in English? Would you like this in Spanish? And we'd like to make it in Mandarin, but we're really struggling with it. We'll get there. We have a really phenomenal partner that's helping us in that. Tailspin has been doing wonderful work for us in this space. But the concept is around showing something that's so unique that everybody gets immediately like, I got that. And by the way, that doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't have to go all out. You don't even have to spend 100K or 50K. Just something small that can be cranked out in about a week or two. Show that, and then, but also that thing that you showed is the foundational element of what you're going to end up producing. It has something specific to do with the problem that you're solving. And that will get you past the demo into the pilot. The second thing I would add is that you probably need on your team a really phenomenal communications person that follows up. Because what happens is you come in, you make a presentation, everybody's excited about it, and then they go back to work. And then in 3 days, 5 days a week, they forget about it. And you just blew all that effort to get there, and everybody went back to their day job. So you've got to be, how are we doing? Is there other people that we'd like to demo to? Is there something that I can help you with? But you have someone constantly, if they're showing a hunger for it, give them nibbles to keep them going so you can get to that next phase, which is now I want to start looking at a larger pilot. You get the funding for that. And then that pilot might only be 100 users or 4 or 5 locations. And then it's like, now you got the buy-in. And then I think it was Rich that said, then it's just easy. Then it's just signing paperwork after that. But it's actually hard to go from demo to pilot and then making sure the pilot is successful, and then you can go to a large-scale deployment. So
I want to underscore one more thing, just connecting back to what Blair said as well. I mean, I think related to planning for that long term and the rollout there, the internal communications teams, the branding teams, the marketing, as much as you want your pilot to be successful with your customer, that company wants so even more so, right? And so I think capitalizing on those resources and those teams and making sure there is a steady drumbeat, that there is a plan, not just to deliver the content and to Dan's point, just leave after that and hope for the best. It's to continue, right, messaging, educating, bringing more people in, because chances are, as great as your pilot was, there are multiple business units and teams at the customer side that aren't yet aware of it that could absolutely benefit from being aware of what's happening and would love to follow on and maybe not be the first foray into it, but add to. And so I think it's absolutely important to remember, even as the pilot's going on, even if you're hunkered down behind your laptop creating content, you never stop selling, you never stop communicating.
Awesome. So I'd love to hear actually a couple of distinct stories about how you were able to gain executive buy-in and what success ultimately looked like for the company as well as for your executive sponsor, because it has a lot of impact on careers and companies when these things are successful and they roll it out to everybody. So maybe you can start with you.
Sure, yeah. One comes to mind. We had an SVP at a large telecommunications company, Verizon, and she brought us in because they were really interested in figuring out how do all of these new technologies in the world help us with these specific initiatives. And so we were part of a multifaceted search for different use cases, different initiatives that could help out. And what she found with us was the ability to not just transform operations and have business impact with the bottom line, but there was that deeper connection to how the employees experienced VR and how they experienced their day-to-day as they went to work. And so because it accomplished so many things for her, it was really impactful, and it was able to be something that she was able to message and be proud of, and became a platform for her as well. So I think the benefit for us was not only did that allow kind of multiple follow-on conversations, multiple introductions to new use cases and different teams, as well as different geographies, but also empowered our champion to really make almost more of a career and more of a success around bringing this type of technology to their company.
Nice.
So we were pitching to a global 50 company, couple 100,000 employees. It was to their head of people, so the SVP of people of the whole corporation, and about 120, 130 people from around the globe that are all HR leaders. And we were talking about virtual reality, and we were having them go through a demo. So half the people were in the office, and the other half were actually WebExing in. That was fun to try to cast through a headset to do all that. That's a whole different story, but we were able to do that. And these were HR people. And the demo that they're providing, they're in a simulation, and you're going through the termination of an elderly gentleman for cause. And it's an interaction where you're talking to this individual across the desk, and depending on what you say, he could react in all sorts of weird ways, right? Because it's kind of random. And we put 2 executives in it. They went through it, and the first one was, I could not have, this was like the magic roll of the 20-sided dice. It just was perfect. The avatar got really angry and started swearing at them. And then she tried to go a different path and then made him cry. So if you imagine you're sitting across the table from a 60-year-old man who you're terminating who's crying. It's kind of an emotional state. And then she brought it back and actually brought him back to center. And then he went on his way, and it was a successful termination. Now, what was amazing about this, she took this off, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so perfect. I mean, everything you could possibly do, she did. It was great. It was awesome. But what was amazing about it was all these 130 people in there, they're all HR leaders in their respective groups. Only 3 of them had ever gone through how to terminate someone as a training. Everybody had gone on the job skill training. And they were just like all sitting back in their chair going, how do we do more of this? It was one of those things that just was so awesome for them because they'd never experienced a training in something that they did because it was a soft skill that everybody inherently thought everybody knew. And that point is that executive just glommed onto that and used that as an anchor point on every point that she made as they were talking about what they need to make investment for 2020. These are the things that we want to do. And this is a company, the average age of their employee is 47 years old. And they're wanting to make a big investment because they saw the power of it, and she saw the power of it, and she was the driver for everything. So
Wonderful. Blair, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I would say at Hilton, we are truly blessed with a phenomenal and visionary chief HR officer, Matt Schuyler, who really pushed me personally and our learning team to take risks and take chances and check all this emerging tech out. And so we certainly had executive sponsorship at his level, but it's not to say that his whole team was bought in. And so again, for us, it really started with education. Again, we brought in SuiteRush, we set up some demos, we talked through the basics of VR and AR until they really got it. And I can still see the day where we had all of them in headsets throwing around the boxes and rock climbing and doing all sorts of VR games to where they again instantly were like, oh, let's explore this. The other key thing I think for us is when we look to getting further sponsorship and excitement about it and true investment for it was to say, okay, well, how can VR ultimately save us time, be more efficient, be more effective, and maybe drive down learning costs? And when we did our research and looked at comparable other ways to learn, it was clear that in VR we could reduce the amount of time team members had to sit in instructor-led training. And when we can say reduce amount of time in learning, it immediately translates to our bottom line, and that immediately gets the senior leaders' attention. So through data and facts, and then I think through pulling on their heartstrings a little with some emotional experiences in virtual reality, we were ultimately able to get extensive buy-in throughout the enterprise to where We just completed our third VR experience, and they're all a little different. They all have different target audiences, but it's really, I think, caught fire at Hilton, where people are truly interested and want to see us doing more and are asking for learning to come in and take on projects through virtual reality.
I just want to add one thing to that, is that PwC, of course, we're about reducing costs and reducing risk more than anything. And when we can come in and say, what you take an hour for to train somebody in a classroom, and I can do that same exact training in 20 minutes in a headset, I just gave you 40 minutes of that employee's productivity back. That's huge. It's 1/3 the cost of time. That alone pays for itself. And then I come back and say, you can retain that information twice as long. It's just another add-on. So from a financial perspective, if you're training the right thing, and you've got the right amount of numbers, if you're training 5 people, totally different conversation. You're training 50,000 people, now we're talking some serious money and cost savings. That's a big difference. And understanding the metrics from what the value is and pushing the metrics will get your accountants and your operation leaders and all of those people bought into, okay, I want to see the cost savings. And then you show me one little pilot, and we'll deploy this at a couple locations for a couple hundred people. Now I want to see the next one. And they're going to look at the cost, right? And by going at it from a cost perspective, you will win the people that write the checks a lot more effectively than if you end up doing it, just emotion. It has to be more than just the emotion of it.
I feel like there's one part we didn't talk about.
What's that?
And that's my favorite part, is creativity. Because when people come to us, they're always saying something like, we want training and we want it to be nothing like anyone's seen before. We want it to be creative, story, game, shoot, anything, right? And it's just like, when you go into designing those things, if there's creativity and a different approach to how you do it, whether it's VR, AR, or whatever, it makes it unique and makes people kind of hook in. So I mean, everything that we've done, I think, for Hilton so far has been story-based in some way, or gamified in some way, or something to make it not just training. Because at least for us, it's like VR is like this whole new avenue of creativity that we can work in. It's like, I love coming to these things and hearing about all the cool games you guys are working on and stealing all your ideas and putting them in our stuff. Because, I mean,
it works.
It works. I mean, it's just
awesome.
I'd rather be playing games all day. I could be training, doing the same thing, so.
I mean, it's the difference of the enterprise is, from a priority perspective, enterprise is about compliance, right? They have to do this. It's a legal requirement. They have to perform some type of training to educate their people to do X, Y, or Z.
Not always.
Not always, but for the kind of training that we were looking at in soft skill training is that way. Now, job skill simulation, safety training, different story.
We do have clients where it's optional.
Okay.
Yes. It's because they're selling other products and we have to convince them to.
Yep.
Yes.
That makes sense. But the point is that the L&D teams that build these trainings or go out and license these training, they're always thinking about that. How do I get through all these people so they're in compliance? And what VR is bringing to the table, and this is one of the big lessons that we learned, what VR is really bringing to the table is that people are really learning, right? It isn't about just checking the box off. They're actually learning how to do something, and that hunger is what drives that success, and they get real excited about it. Like, I want more of this. I mean, almost without a doubt, 93% of the people that went through our study all wanted, when can I do my next training this way? I don't want to do an e-learn. I don't want to go to a classroom. I want to put on a headset and learn. And that has huge value, so.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Well,
one of the
go
things to
ahead.
add, yeah, I mean, because one of the things we've been doing with Hilton in our design thinking workshops is actually getting your audience in the room when you're designing. So you have the executives, you have the learning people, and they're actually abstracted oftentimes from their learners. We did a workshop where they said, okay, we want this onboarding to be amazing, tech, everything you could think of. And then they sat down the users, they're like, please don't add any more tech. We don't want to put anything on. This is hard enough. And they were blown away by this epiphany. And so I think as part of your process, you should have the users come in those first meetings to really validate your ideas or devalidate them. So
Right.
That's good. That's great. That's great feedback.
Wonderful. So we have roughly 5 minutes left. I want to give you a chance to kind of provide any advice that you haven't so far. I know one of the things that we've been talking about is soft skills training. I know normally people often think about VR for hard skills training, right? So it's really interesting that soft skills training is something that is such a focus. And a lot of these things we can't necessarily teach people. I'd love, Blair, for you to talk a little bit more about the empathy training you all did and why that was so uniquely possible with VR and the impact that it had.
Yeah. Empathy is a huge piece in the hospitality industry for our team members who check in guests each and every day, for team members at our hotels serving food and servicing banquets, etc. For them to really understand what our guests go through and be in their shoes as a business traveler or a leisure traveler can really make the difference between failing their expectations and not meeting them, or exceeding their expectations. And we do that now in training through role plays and service skills training, which are hours upon hours of content. And in VR, we created guest-facing scenarios where the team member puts on the headset and is immediately becomes the guest and has different experiences with team members where things go wrong or things go over the top well. And the team member is then asked as that guest, well, how did that make you feel? And when they exceed expectations, they feel one way, and when they fail, they clearly feel another, and they select all this through VR. But it immediately shows them the difference between their own actions with the guests. And that happens in a matter of minutes versus hours it would take in traditional training. The fact that we can use VR as what I'm going to call this empathy building machine, we can apply to so many scenarios across so many of our brands. And there's, I have countless use cases for this, so it's not hard to conjure up. But it is a true game changer for us, and we're really excited to do more work in this empathy space. But that was a real, I think, differentiator, and now people really see. We had thousands of GMs come through where we show them this learning, and they were really blown away by the impact it could make on their guest service scores, on their problem resolution scores, and we're really excited to now roll that out at scale.
To add to that, for us, in the empathy space, we found multiple successful directions to take it. I mean, on one hand, you can use the power of the immersive environment to really put yourselves in the shoes of another, right? Really, whether you're a call center agent transporting you to the caller side and trying to understand more empathy about what it's like to not have power in their home, or what it's like to have a medical bill late because their father's sick or something like that. We've also found job skill related type tactical training around what are the words you say and how do you make sure that you come across as empathetic and authentic, and making sure that you have that side. One interesting thing we found as well with the medium of VR and why it was helpful is sometimes trainees actually don't feel comfortable practicing empathy with another live human being. It's sometimes an awkward thing to practice apologizing to your peer or doing so with a manager in the room. In fact, one of our training sessions, we had the director wait until all of the trainees left the room in order for her to actually go through our experience and say, okay, now I'm ready to try this. And so that's where the power of VR and the power of practice with something that isn't necessarily human, but human-like is actually quite powerful for empathy.
Absolutely. One of the things that we do with that is our interfaces are through gaze and voice, no controllers. That way, first of all, they have to pay attention. The user in the headset can't be distracted by trying to figure out what they need to do with the controller. They can just use their voice, or they can use their eye gaze. And we find that that's more immersive for the end user, and it provides that ability when they're in that empathetic situation that they say something. It's not only what they say, but it's how they say it. Now, in our generation now, we're not there yet, but we think in the next generation, we'll be able to say things and it will be able to understand the context and the velocity in which you say something. Did you say this kind of snarky, or did you say this with passion, right? And the artificial intelligence will come back to you with the appropriate response. And when you can do that with practice, I think you've really hit a gold mine.
And biometrics.
And biometric, yes, I would agree with that.
Very excited about biometrics.
All right, well, we are coming to the end of our time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will be going out the doors to the left, so that if you want to have additional conversations with any of us, we'll be outside so that the next panel can go ahead and get started. And also want to make sure that you come and join us at our happy hour today. So we have a meetup for enterprise customers and developers in the Hilton, which is just to the right exit. Be in the lobby, right? The Hilton.
Facebook is buying.
That's right. 5:15 to 6:15 we'll be there. A great time for folks to build community and collaborate and meet more people in the enterprise space.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.